Every time Yu-Gi-Oh adds a new mechanic, there's always some resistance from old school fans. I personally see both sides of the argument. Konami is making changes to a game that many of us grew up with to where now when you look at it in 2025, it's unrecognizable from even just 10 years ago. On the other hand, some will say changes need to be made to keep the game fresh. Enter the XYZ mechanic. XYZ monsters introduced in Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, one of the less popular anime series, has things like ranks and materials. These details might seem unnecessarily confusing at first glance. However, these mechanics do serve a specific purpose that I think is quite important. In this video, I want to analyze the design of XYZ monsters and discuss how they actually helped Yu-Gi-Oh! Thrive, whereas links, debatably, have led Yu-Gi-Oh! To failing, at least in the eyes of some of the player base. I also want to compare it to synchros, because if we're going to discuss game mechanics, we gotta include synchros. My name is Avery, and this is a look back on the XYZ mechanic and where it has evolved today. Be sure to smash the boo-boo stain off of that like and subscribe button, as we are on the road to 2,000 subscribers. With all that being said, let's dive on into it, shall we? Where links failed Yu-Gi-Oh!, where XYZ made it thrive. There are three main things that make XYZ monsters unique. There's their summon method, like with any mechanic, but there's also the fact that they have ranks instead of levels. Finally, there's the way they keep XYZ materials attached. For each of these aspects, I'm going to be discussing their benefits and design intent, as well as their issues. Also, I'll be comparing them to the other two summoning methods mentioned before, Synchro and Link summoning. Now, Synchros was Konami's first attempt at a new monster type, not counting fusions, as fusions were pretty useless throughout the first several years of the game's lifespan if you weren't using Future Fusion or Metamorphosis. Synchros were fun, but not perfect, and a lot of the design of XYZ monsters seems targeted at its flaws. Meanwhile, Link summoning is quite similar to XYZ, but seems to have some issues that the design of XYZ monsters specifically avoided. To XYZ summon, you overlay two or more monsters of the same level. Some XYZ monsters perform what is known as XYZ evolution, which is similar to contact fusion. That's because it replaces the mechanic with a special method written on the card. This is usually using one other specific card as a material, often another XYZ monster. Throughout my research in this video, a lot of people seem to call it XYZ evolution. I don't know if that's from the anime, but we're going to go with that name for argument's sake. The basics of XYZ summoning are very simple and easy to understand. Anyone can find two monsters of the same level. It also has the potential for interesting level manipulation support like the card Tannhauser Gate. It also gives levels from 9 to 12 a purpose. Before, they were too high for most synchro plays and the same as 7 to 8 for tribute summons. The mechanic is fairly generic enough to give many decks access to some useful tools. XYZ Evolution also introduces interesting possibilities for designing XYZ monsters. For example, Beatrice, Lady of the Eternal, encouraged hand management, and Orcus Dingirasu introduced XYZ to a deck that couldn't support it before. XYZ Evolution also circumvents some issues with combo potential that I'll discuss later. It's a fair point that being generic isn't always a good thing. The quote-unquote rank 4 toolbox, seen most recently with Rizal, overtook the unique identity of many decks. While careful monster design can avoid it, XYZ evolution is often completely free, which removes choice from the game. Very often, an XYZ evolution is either always better or occasionally always worse than the base form, since there's often no cost of any kind. You can just decide which is best and ignore the rest. For example, when's the last time you saw a Utopia that wasn't underneath the Lightning, or I suppose even a AA Zeus, but who's playing number 39 Utopia anymore? These free summons played a major part in Zodiac's domination. Zodiac is going to come up a lot as a case where the design of XYZ monsters went wrong. Now, when compared to Synchros, in order to XYZ summon, you just add up the levels of a tuner monster and some non-tuner monsters. They're sent to the graveyard to summon a Synchro monster with a level equal to the total. Tuner monsters were invented just for this, so old deck themes didn't have any. Compared to XYZ, this makes it harder to use Synchros in a deck not dedicated to it. Of course, whether being less generic is good or bad is hard to say. Now, when compared to Link summon, you just send two or more monsters to the graveyard. Well, if XYZ is two generics, Links definitely fucking are. While Firewall Dragon was legal before its errata, almost any deck that could summon a lot became a bad attempt at extra linking, down to random things like even ninjas of all things. From several years ago, even if you want to look at that far back, Nightmare monsters largely replaced the rank 4 toolbox of old, I would argue. Now, most monsters have a level represented by a number of orange stars in the top right. That's pretty obvious. XYZ instead have black rank stars at the top left. left. Now that might sound stupid, but for the purposes of mechanics and card effects, they're completely different. The main point is that Xyz monsters don't have a level at all. The reason Xyz monsters don't have levels is because you need levels to Xyz summon. When designing Xyz monsters, it seems Konami wanted to make sure people couldn't use them as materials for other Xyz easily. After what happened when Zodiac ignored this design principle altogether, that seems like it was the right decision. Konami designs every card with certain assumptions in mind. At least I like to think so. Before Xyz monsters, designers assumed that every single monster had a level. Ranks broke that assumption and required special rulings that level-based things don't affect Xyz monsters. It's a common point of confusion for new players, I feel, that having no level is different to level 0. It also means they don't play nice with synchro summoning. While the lack of combo potential is deliberate, it can also be kind of a shame. The plays in many Xyz decks, many would argue, can be kind of boring. You just make one monster and you're stuck with it, protect the castle, as it were. When Zexal wanted to expand the design of Xyz monsters by adding the rank up mechanic, it had to introduce bricky rank up magic spell cards. For a few reasons that I'm not really going to get into, these are almost impossible to search in most cases. Because of this, any Xyz monster that has to be summoned with a rank up magic spell are almost unplayable. Now, when compared to synchros, synchro monsters have levels the same as any other card before them. It's perfectly possible to use a synchro monster as synchro material. This isn't anything broken though. If you don't need to do it, it's more of a waste than anything. If you do need to, on the other hand, it's part of what many call Excel Synchro, the way Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D's expanded the mechanic in its second half. This feels like a natural extension of synchro summoning. Compared to the tacked on nature of rank up magic, the idea of climbing the so-called synchro ladder was also a key part of many combo-oriented synchro decks before Master Rule 4. Now, when we compare it to Lynx, Link monsters also don't have a level, and they don't have a rank. They also don't have defense points or the ability to go into defense mode, including face down. And now you can control more than 5 monsters, and the zones aren't all in the same row. If giving Xyz monsters broke some old assumptions in card design, Link summoning messed up almost everything. Unlike Xyz, Link monsters allow using others as material. In fact, it's a central part of the mechanic. The Link climbing, so to speak, causes a bunch of problems. For example, a Link monster needing effect monsters as material to prevent token abuse is meaningless because there are other Link monsters that can use tokens and are effect monsters. Xyz summoning doesn't send the materials to the graveyard. Instead, the materials are attached in a pile underneath the Xyz monster. From there, they can be attached by card effects, sending them to the graveyard. Detaching a material is very often the cost for an Xyz monster's primary effect. Materials are key to the design of Xyz monsters, as well as being the most obvious difference in terms of play experience. They have multiple different design purposes. For one, the fact they're not sent to the graveyard during the summon is another limiter on combo abuse. Sangan doesn't get its search effect. Yes, I'll talk about the rule change in a minute, and there's nothing in the graveyard to revive for loops. The other main thing materials achieve, though, is acting as a resource cost for effects. If a card has to detach a material to use its effect, it can only do so a few times. Notably, if you revive an Xyz, it usually has no materials and can't use such an effect at all. Materials have some minor incidental benefits too. For one, tokens can't be used. This prevents situations like Scapegoat being a free rank 1. Another upside is the interesting new design space for effects to work with. For all of Zodiac's problems, materials granting effects that can be swapped out by attaching different materials was a great unique idea that can only exist thanks to the design of Xyz monsters. The Time Thieves are another example. Specifically, Redoer attaches spells and traps, then detaches them for more powerful effects than it gets normally by just simply detaching a monster. There's a lot in common here with the downsides of ranks. Materials caused rulings confusions when first released, to the point that even TCG staff originally thought Sangan would activate when detached. The intentional hampering of combo potential can be a bit much and makes decks more linear and boring in some people's eyes. Another issue is how the resource cost aspect doesn't always work out. Normally, you'll only use an effect once anyway. After that, your opponent will probably destroy it or you've already won. This makes detaching material barely a cost at all. Another issue is that cards have to be designed around the Xyz material restrictions. Some Xyz monsters have their most important effects ignore Xyz material, making the whole thing seem arbitrary. Perfect example of this being totally awesome. Now, when compared to synchros, synchro materials are sent to the graveyard and they can be tokens. This led to strategies like plant synchro, which would abuse floaters like Dandelion for excessive amounts of free synchro material. Or if you've played Edison as of late, the Forg deck being able to dump a Dandelion to the graveyard off of Fishborg Blaster or Foolish Burial, and then getting 2 tokens, and then being able to use Substitute to tribute those tokens to get you free bodies on the board. Strategies like this were so powerful that cards like Dandelion were banned for ages. These are the main things the design of Xyz monsters intended materials to prevent. Now, going back to Lynx, when we compare it to that, almost immediately after Dandelion did get unbanned, Lynx came out and they had to put it straight back to banned. Link materials also can be tokens and go to the graveyard, and they prove exactly why Xyz materials don't. With materials being easier to use than Synchro, countless cards like Scapegoat, Go for the Vague Shadow, and Galaxy Tomahawk are or were on the ban list to some degree for their ability to generate free materials. And like how some Xyz don't use materials, cards like Crystron, Hauki, Fibrax ignore what's unique about Lynx by doing nothing with their arrows, which other cards use to restrict effects. And yes, I know Scapegoat's at 3 now, but it used to be on the ban list due to its interaction with Lynx. Now, as an experienced player, you might find some of what I have to say strange. On the one hand, I'm saying the design of Xyz monsters is inherently balanced. But on the other hand, some are also broken. There are plenty of banned Xyz monsters, so how can this be accurate to say? My thinking is this. It's because Xyz are so balanced inherently. Designers tried to compensate for the lack of combos and inherent effect cost by making individual cards stronger, too strong in some cases, i.e. Dryden or even Rizal Detonator. Other cases like Zodiac, as I've mentioned before, are broken because they ignore some of Xyz's built-in power limits. Ironically, Galaxy Tomahawk is banned because a different mechanic was designed in ignorance of the design of Xyz monsters. Now, I won't tell you how to feel about Xyz as a mechanic. I didn't make this to convince you one way or the other. To be honest, I made it because the other 2 videos I've done in this format did hella well for the channel. I just wanted to explain the theory behind some aspects of the design of Xyz monsters that might seem weird at first glance. Whether you think that theory worked in practice or if it's worth the downsides is your decision to make. As for my personal opinion, I understand both sides of the coin. Some feel Xyz monsters was a good addition. It started basic with number 39 Utopia, and it wasn't until power creep and new cards got into the overall card pool where things needed to start being banned. Perfect example I think of off the top of my head is Lavable Chain with Infernities, where the I'm going to whip out my diddly and proceed to play with myself for 20 minutes Infernity combo deck didn't become a thing until hat format in 2014, which I've covered in my retrospective series. Yes, that's a shameless plug. Or how something like Rizal Detonator on the surface doesn't seem horrible until you realize generic engines like Fiendsmith can insulate you from a Nibiru coming down to get rid of said detonator, because it gives you access to Wave High King Caesar. If you think about it, the only thing that makes Fiendsmith balance is the amount of extra deck space it takes up. There's the argument to be made Rizal is kind of balanced outside of maybe Duo Drive and Rizal Cross being able to insulate you from a nib crapping on your field. But that doesn't excuse the fact that due to power creep and new cards coming out, that the engine has become so much more busted, especially when you back it up with, say, Mitsurugi cards that arguably create such a busted board when no hand traps are involved that it's essentially an FTK board. On the flip side, Xyz decks like Tellarknights back in the day that often just sit on their best monster of the right rank can be boring to many because at that point you're just playing a Helmet Protect the Castle deck. Still though, it's clear a level of thought went into the design of Xyz monsters. Compared to Link monsters, the difference is night and day. Whether or not you believe the end result worked out, I can appreciate the idea behind it. Maybe in the future, Konami learns more from their history. If future mechanics are designed as carefully as Xyz monsters, or even more so, I think there's a lot of potential for good things to come, and hopefully Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be around for another 25 years. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, a like rating would really appreciate if you could share the video around. I really appreciate all the love and support as of late. Like I said in my community post, thank you so much for over 1,700 subscribers. I'm so thankful, so blessed, and I just can't thank you enough. So I'm going to keep on making content like this. I've really been enjoying it, and all of the feedback and just all of the support has just been awesome. So I just wanted to take that time to thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. Guys, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.